Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and over the last few short weeks on the War Within Alpha, since I was able to get in only somewhat recently, I've been slowly spending more and more time taking a much closer look at all the class hero specs coming out with the next expansion. And by no means are all the hero specs are available on the alpha testing just yet, and over the next few builds we'll likely be getting even more updates, as we still have classes such as the Shaman and the Rogue that haven't even seen the full array of hero specs available for them in the next expansion. However, we have been able to cover classes such as the Demon Hunter, the Death Knight, the Mage, and today I want to take a much closer look at the Warrior hero specs, the Slayer, the Colossus, and the Mountain Thane, and do a bit of a deeper dive behind every single one of these talents, how they're looking to change your class's gameplay for Fury, Arms, and Protection, and what kind of thematics and visuals are they going to be able to add to spice up that class heading into the War Within expansion. So with everything being said, let's take a much closer look at the class of the Warrior. First of all, let's take a look at the Fury, Warrior, Slayer hero spec, and I'll kind of branch around from every single hero spec, going over the very basics using one spec as an example, and then kind of showcasing how this spec changes depending whether you're playing it as Arms, Fury, or Protection. Starting off with the Slayer, which is probably one of the more passive options for Warrior, though it does get some engaging new gameplay that is going to have you focusing a bit on your rotation. Slayers are vicious warriors who set their sights on their targets and pursue them relentlessly to overwhelm their foes with an onslaught of might and steel. And this one is going to heavily play into abilities such as Execute as well as Blade Storm. Your first ability is going to be Slayer's Dominance, which is only just one small piece out of the big puzzle that is the Slayer playstyle. With Slayer's Dominance, your attacks have a fairly high chance to overwhelm your target's defenses, triggering a Slayer's Strike, which does a decent bit of physical damage, and applying Mark for execution, increasing the damage that they take from your next execute by 10%, stacking up to 3 times. Further down the rows, we have Overwhelming Blades, which is where Blade Storm is being introduced as part of this playstyle. Each strike of Blade Storm applies Overwhelm to all enemies it strikes, increasing their damage taken by 1% for 20 seconds, with maximum 10% damage taken. The first thing I wanted to test out is whether this works with Blade Storm or Ravager, which is the alternative playstyle to Blade Storm. However, this hero spec of Slayer wants you to play with Blade Storm. None of these talents are going to work off of Ravager, and all of them are focused to work off of Blade Storm specifically, which is going to be kind of unusual depending whether you're playing Arms or Fury. For Arms, Blade Storm is a fantastic ability that's going to be core to your overall playstyle, and many warriors are fairly used to playing around with Blade Storm or Ravager. For Fury, however, Blade Storm is kind of a new re-addition for this expansion specifically. Blade Storm in the past has been a bit of a hit and miss ability when it comes to Fury, since as a spec you build so much rage with your Bloodthirst, Raging Blows, and as of Dragonflight you have tools such as Onslaught as well as Odin's Fury. And most of your abilities generate rage very efficiently, where in the past expansions, Blade Storm just didn't quite hit the mark when it comes to that overall efficiency, causing Fury warriors to use Blade Storm to get other procs, but quickly cancelling Blade Storm halfway through the burst so that you can go back to using Bloodthirst, Raging Blows, Executes, and all the other abilities to build and spend rage. So hopefully the tuning for the Slayer is going to be good enough where you don't want to cancel Blade Storm, because otherwise it's going to create a very unfun and a choppy experience. That being said, Blade Storm is going to be there to reinforce a damage debuff that you'll want to maintain on your target, which means for both Arms and Fury, you'll likely want to double up on your Blade Storms just for that debuff value. A little further down we have Frantic Flurry, where your Bloodthirst has a chance to cause you to unleash an empowered partial Blade Storm that strikes all enemies around you once for 250 additional damage. Also, this unlocks the ability to use things like Pummel and Stormbolt while Blade Storming. And using Bloodthirst is how you'll try to maintain your Overwhelming Blades debuff as best as possible, while still trying to weave in actual Blade Storms to continue this buff when you're not getting enough procs from Frantic Flurry. The final core piece to this puzzle is going to be Unrelenting Onslaught. When you execute a target that you've marked for execution with your very first talent, you both reduce the cooldown of Blaze Storm by 5 seconds and apply 2 stacks of Overwhelming to the target, which is another way to keep refreshing the stacks of Overwhelmed against your foe whenever you're getting free procs of sudden death. Though in Execute, this debuff becomes a lot more consistent as Execute can be spammed fairly regularly. And that's going to make up the core playstyle of this Slayer, with the other talents amplifying your defensives, mobility, and damage utility. With the right hand side, we have a choice between Relentless Pursuit, which allows charge to remove all impairment effects and granting you a bit of movement speed for 3 seconds. Or Vicious Agility, where Heroic Leap helps reduce the cooldown of charge, and vice versa, with charge reducing the cooldown of Heroic Leap. We have auto attack talents such as Tunnel Vision, where your auto attack speed is increased by 2% every 3 seconds while you're focusing on a singular enemy, with up to maximum 20% auto attack speed increase, though changing the target will reset this effect. However, on the flip side, you could always pick up Thrill of the Kill, where using Execute increases your auto attack speed by 30% for 10 seconds, which is going to be a bit better in multi-target situations. Further down the line, we have Slayer's Focus, which is going to amplify the damage of your Bloodthirst, making it a core ability you'll want to prioritize in your rotation. On the left hand side, we have Imminent Demise, which increases sudden death's chance to reset the cooldown of Execute, making it usable against any target. Using sudden death also accelerates your next Blade Storm, allowing it to strike 1 additional time without increasing its overall duration. Next up, we have Death's Dive, where you will actually heal for 50% of all damage dealt by sudden death executes. And right below that, we have Slay, where enemies that are marked for execution increase the critical strike chance and critical strike damage of your next execute on the target by 10%. In the middle, we have another choice node with either Slayer's Reflexes, where Slayer's strikes have a 50% chance to reset the cooldown of your Bloodthirst to hopefully make it more consistent rotationally. Though if you don't want to play with a proc rate, you can always reduce its cooldown passively with Constant Pressure. And what this playstyle ends up doing is it's a management playstyle where you want to maximize the power of your Overwhelmed debuff. As you use abilities, you'll also be marking enemies for execution, where using Execute allows you to prolong that Overwhelmed debuff a little bit longer. For Fury, you'll want to spam Bloodthirst as much as possible in hopes that you get those random procs of Blade Storm so that you can continue the debuff on the target for as long as possible. Though you won't always be able to get access to procs of Blade Storm, this is where you may actually want to hold Blade Storm uses in order to wait until the very last moment to refresh the debuff all over again, which overall doesn't necessarily change rotation for the Fury, but gives you an extra buffs and debuffs to manage, and gives certain abilities such as Blaze Storm less of this AoE burst value, but rather a debuff value that you may now want to save during very key moments. For Arms Warriors, this playstyle doesn't change too much, though the prime ability that will be proccing your random Blaze Storms will be Overpower, with all the other talents above Bloodthirst will instead buff Overpower instead, making it a little bit of a higher priority ability. And it's going to be interesting dynamic since Arms Warriors do have access to 2 Blaze Storms, one from Blade Master's Torment as well as the Blaze Storm ability itself. Though normally you try to sync both of those abilities inside of your Colossus Smash or Warbreaker window, so we may actually see Arms Warriors delaying one Blaze Storm apart from another in order to maximize the value of the debuff that the playstyle offers. For the most part, Slayer feels like a consistent addition to either Arms or Fury Warrior. It doesn't necessarily change your rotation in a wild way, but it does make you reconsider your abilities a little. Though the power that this comes with between Bloodthirst, additional executes, random Blaze Storms, which actually do quite a bit of damage, does feel satisfying. And hopefully Blaze Storm will be tuned accordingly for both Fury and Arms Warrior so that it always feels like a powerful button that's worth using any moment. And hopefully we won't see Fury Warriors in the future cancelling out Blaze Storm early just so they could use all of the higher priority abilities. And up next we have the Mountain Thane Warriors, which has to be one of the most visually pleasing playstyles with all of the thunder abilities that your ability is not going to harness. Mountain Thanes are fierce fighters that live to challenge themselves against worthy opponents, drawing strength from the earth and power from the storm. They strike blows that hit with a thunderclap to overwhelm their enemies. Part of the main Mountain Thane playstyle is going to be random procs of lightning strikes with your abilities. Damaging enemies with Thunderclap, Revenge, Raging Blow, or Execute has a small chance to also strike the target with additional nature damage while generating additional rage. These lightning strikes are more likely to occur during your avatar uptime. From there, we'll see a bunch of different changes like buffs to your overall playstyle, with Strength of the Mountain, which is going to increase the damage of Shield Slam, Bloodthirst, and Rampage. Further down the choice node, we can either go with Flashing Skies, where chance for lightning strikes to critical strike is increased by 5%, and its critical strike damage is increased by 10%. Or on the flip side, you can go with Valor Jar's Training, where lightning strikes reduce the cooldown of Ravager by an additional second. Further down, we have Burst of Power, where lightning strikes have a 20% chance to make an next 2 shield slams, or Bloodthirst have no cooldown. In the middle row, we have a couple of modifying talents, such as Ground Current, where lightning strikes will now deal additional damage to nearby foes with a bit of a soft cap of 5 targets. Further down, you can amplify your control with Storm Bolts, where Storm Bolt will now hit 2 additional nearby targets, stunning them for 2 seconds. Or Storm Shield, where intervening to a target grants him a shield for 5 seconds that absorbs magic damage equal to 3 times your armor value. Further down, we have Gathering Clouds passive, where your attacks trigger lightning strikes 30% more often. Or Thorum's Might, where lightning strikes will generate 5 rage, and Revenge, Raging Blow, and Execute damage is being increased by 15%. And on the left hand side, we have talents that directly interact with the Mountain Thane playstyle with Call of Thunder, a passive where Storm Strike and Nature damage and abilities will deal 5% more damage. Storm Strike damage will also ignore all armor. Thunderclap damage is increased by 50% and it now generates 5 rage. Talents such as Seismic Reverberations, Improved Whirlwind, Meat Cleaver, and Barbaric Training all improve Thunderclap as well as Whirlwind. And if you look at the actual talents inside of your class as well as spec talent trees, you do have talents that now add Thunderclap as well as Whirlwind as part of the rotation. This is especially interesting for Fury Warriors, because with improved Whirlwind is how you cleave your single target damage onto nearby targets, meaning that Thunderclap now gains all of the benefits of the Whirlwind, causing all of your abilities to cleave nearby foes for a handful of seconds. This means that Thunderclap is actually going to take place of Whirlwind when it comes to basic rotation, at least when it comes to AoE and cleave situations. And having this Thunderclap with lightning flying everywhere is a notable change. Even though mechanically it doesn't really change anything for your playstyle, you do notice that your warrior now stomps around instead of whirlwinding enemies to cleave nearby foes. The Thunderclap is going to have much more value than as a tool used to cleave nearby targets, as it can be further amplified in the hero spec tree. With Thunder Blast, Shield Slam, and Bloodthirst have a 35% chance to grant you Thunder Blast, stack it up to 2 charges, where your next Thunderclap becomes a Thunder Blast that deals Storm Strike damage. A little further down, we have Steadfast as the peaks, which allows you Victory Rush to increase your maximum health by 10% for 5 seconds. Or if you want a more defensive choice, Keep Your Feet on the Ground allows Thunder Blast to reduce the damage you take by 8% for 5 seconds instead. And finally, we have the capstone trait, Avatar of the Storm. Casting Avatar grants you 2 charges of Thunder Blast and resets the cooldown of Thunderclap. While Avatar is not active, however, lightning strikes have a 10% chance to grant you Avatar for 4 seconds. The Mountain Thane playstyle for Fury in particular ends up feeling quite notable, because it does change your overall rotation. The inclusion of Thunderclap as a basic ability, but also as a tool to cleave nearby targets, is a fantastic addition. Not only does it look visually pleasing as your warrior stomping around like an absolute barbarian, but it also does not disrupt your rotation in the slightest. So it ends up kind of weaving itself in nicely while also changing a certain aspect of the Fury Warrior, which I think makes Mountain Thane at least a full package when it comes to the thematics of it all, how it changes the warrior, as well as the gameplay that it offers, where it's not disruptive but rather synergetic. And I'm very much hoping the Mountain Thane will be tuned correctly so that it's an actual viable option, because so far playing with it on the alpha, and it's definitely been one of the more fun hero specs to play around with so far. As for Protection Warriors, Mountain Thane ends up synergizing with Protection easily, since Thunderclap ends up being kind of a base combat ability that Prot Warriors already utilize. And with a natural cooldown reduction value of Anger Management, which helps reduce the cooldown of Avatar, plus an empowered version of Avatar with Unstoppable Force, which allows you to use Thunderclap far more often, there's an obvious synergy behind Mountain Thane and picking it up as a Protection Warrior. Lastly, we have the Colossus, shared between arms and prot warriors, which I think is going to be one of the more divisive hero specs with the best highs but also the lowest lows. A Colossus is a veteran of countless battles who can shrug off most attacks while using expert precision to deliver the most powerful strikes and crush their enemies. Where plenty of classes in WoW utilize various cosmic forces such as paladins with the holy magic, or death knights summoning undeads, or mages blasting the foes with the arcane frost and fire, warriors embody rage incarnate, and the Colossus hero spec is going to be all this raw strength and rage put into one singular ability called Demolish, which is going to be a key ability for the overall playstyle. Demolish has a 45-second cooldown, and it's a channeled ability where the warrior unleashes a series of precise and powerful strikes against their target, dealing a ton of damage to it, as well as some fall-off damage to all nearby foes. While channeling Demolish, you take 10% less damage and become immune to stuns, knockbacks, and forced movement effects. And the warrior can still maintain blocks, parries, and dodges while using this ability, though you will be rooted in place when using Demolish. And off the bat, we already have the divisiveness of Demolish itself, the fact that it keeps you in place and is going to limit your mobility, forcing warriors, arms, and prot to be very careful with no positionals. Though Blizzard did add little things such as you can use Heroic Leap while using Demolish, so if you do need to make a micro adjustment to reposition, you can do so while continuing to demolish your target. And for the most part, Demolish is going to be a primary ability of how you'll be utilizing your arms and protection warrior. From there on, we have some utility choices such as Bone Shaker, which is going to increase the duration of your Shockwave stun by 2 additional seconds. Or Earthquaker, where Shockwave also knocks enemies into the air and its cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds, which could give you a little bit more interesting control value. Further down, we have defensive choices like No Stranger to Pain, where total amount of damage prevented by Ignore Pain is increased by 15%. Or you can go with Rally, where taking damage has a small chance to give you second wind for 2 seconds, which will restore 12% of your health over that time. And further down, we have very flavorful and fun talents such as Mountain of Muscle and Scars. You deal 5% more damage, you take 5% less damage, and your size and stature is increased by 5%. And I love talents like these, even though the size is kind of just a flavor text, it does make the warrior actually look a little bit larger than any other warrior that isn't of the Colossus spec. Which I think more hero specs need to have some flavor stuff like this to really make it stand out from the crowd. On the left hand side, we have some crit value with Martial Expert, where critical strike damage of your abilities is flat out increased by 10%, and the amount of damage blocked by your critical blocks for protection is also increased by 10%. Then we have a choice node with One Against Many, where you can either empower your Shockwave, Cleave, Whirlwind, and Revenge to deal 5% more damage per each target affected, or amplify your bleeds, where a passive buff called Colossus Might is going to increase the damage of your Rend and Deep Wounds by 2% per stack. Further down, we have Practice Strikes, where Mortal Strike and Shield Slam damage is simply being amplified by 20%. Now for the primary ability that is going to be bolstering Demolish, which is Colossal Might. Colossal Might increases the damage your next Demolish would deal by 10%. Abilities such as Mortal Strike and Shield Slam grant a stack of Colossus Might, stacking up to 10 times. Further down, we have Tide of Battle, where Colossus Might increases the damage of your Overpower and Revenge by 5% per stack, which is going to also have the Arterial Bleed piggybacking off of this talent as well. Further down, we have Precise Might, where critical strikes with Mortal Strike and Shield Slam grant you an additional stack of Colossus Might, further increasing your damage and the damage of Demolish. Though the capstone trait of Dominance of the Colossus will allow your Colossus Might to stack up to 10 times maximum. And if you were to gain a stack of Colossus Might when you are already at max stacks, it instead reduces the cooldown to Demolish by 2 seconds. Enemies affected by Demolish will then take up to 10% more damage from you as a debuff and will deal up to 10% less damage to you for 10 seconds based on the number of stacks of Colossus Might consumed by Demolish. And it should not be understated, the ability of Demolish does ridiculous amounts of damage. It's actually unhinged just how hard this ability can hit, especially once you fully build it up together. Whether you play as protection or arms, this ability just strikes out with so much fervor. It is absolutely insanely fun to use as soon as it's available. And Colossus heavily leans into the damage of Demolish, which is going to give you this single-minded playstyle of hitting the enemy as hard as humanly possible. And the animation that plays out for Demolish is also a little bit different than you would have for any of the warrior animation. I really do hope they end up spicing it up a little bit with dust and dirt and maybe earth being shattered in every direction with every single swing of your weapons. But overall, it does have a unique flavor, and I'm sure they'll end up developing the animation further as we get through more alpha builds. And while Demolish is an insanely fun ability that I cannot stop playing with, there is also the biggest drawback for this, especially as Arms Warrior. As the buff of Colossus Might that buffs the damage of Demolish can only be buffed by Mortal Strike and nothing else. This is fine in a pure single target situation, but when it comes to hitting multiple targets or AoE situations such as Mythic Plus dungeons, it doesn't work for the talents such as Cleave, which essentially is the AoE version of Mortal Strike. And this is going to be my biggest frustration with Colossus, because the amount of raw damage that the ability does is insane, but it is very uncomfortable to play with when it comes to multi-target encounters. Another thing I noticed with Demolish is if you're playing a regular playstyle with anger management, my Warbreaker came off cooldown a little bit quicker than Demolish, and it actually ended up desyncing from one another. This may be completely solved with better and more optimized gear and stats, since our characters are not really wearing the best gear available, lacking the necessary crit, haste, mastery, and versatility to be a fully functional character. That being said, playing with the current characters we have right now, I wanted to give Spiteful Serenity a bit of a go, since Blizz in recent builds have been trying to make this playstyle a little bit more even with the likes of Anger Management, which is usually synergized with Test of Might. However, alternatively, they wanted to make Spiteful Serenity worthy of value, extending the duration of Colossus Smash and Avatar, but reducing some of their overall amp, though synergizing it together with In for the Kill, which is now going to last for the entire duration of Warbreaker or Colossus Smash, whose duration can be further increased thanks to Spiteful Serenity. And playing this build, I actually found that my Avatar, as well as my Warbreaker, and even Champion Spear, which is mostly used there to amplify the damage of my Demolish, all end up synergizing and lining up fairly regularly with one another, where you'll send Colossus Smash, Avatar, Champion Spear, and Demolish together, and then later down the line you can combine Colossus Smash and Demolish. Then for the next setup, you have Avatar, Colossus, Spear, and Demolish all together, which allows you to create some sort of a rhythm with your cooldown synergy. I'm not sure if that is the playstyle you'll end up playing, but it's interesting to see how Demolish is set up in such a way where you could actually utilize these talent changes in order to have Demolish line up a little bit better with the rest of your cooldowns. Though it doesn't mean that Spiteful Serenity is going to be the way you play Warrior. I think with better stats you will go back to Anger Management and you'll find ways to sync up Demolish. Or maybe you'll just try to use Demolish as often as possible, whether it lines up in a Colossus Smash window or not, just because this ability hits so damn hard. And when it comes to Protection Warrior, the Colossus is going to have exact same raw power that it grants Arms. It's going to grant that same amount of power to Protection as well, offering him a fantastic bit of single target as well as cleave damage with every Demolish. And Protection Warriors actually has a variety of different cooldowns that it can weave together in order to create some big burst windows and opportunities. But the biggest benefits, at least defensively, that's going to come from playing a Colossus Protection Warrior is from Dominance of the Colossus for that 10% damage reduction for 10 seconds, which is actually active quite often, offering you an extra layer of a defensive to layer together with all your other cooldowns. But then we have things like Mountains of Muscle and Scars, which offers you a little bit extra passive protection. And of course, plenty of additional physical damage blocking with Martial Expert if you end up sticking into Critical Strike as your primary stat. But unlike Arms Warrior, which is going to try to line up cooldowns around the Colossus Demolish ability, for Protection this is a bit more of a passive option that weaves in into your basic rotation quite easily, and you end up having a much more relaxed conditions behind how you utilize Colossus and the Demolish ability, which makes it a fairly passive option for Protection Warrior. That adds you more gameplay, that adds you more defenses without overly complicating your overall playstyle. But with that, that's going to be all the Warrior hero specs in the War Within Alpha that we got to test out so far. And I think it's a little bit too early to start really ranking these hero specs from the best to worst, but I can tell you easily which ones were my favorites. Out of the three of them, Slayer ended up being the most passive option that actually does add some additional gameplay. Thematically and gameplay wise, I feel like this one added quite a bit to the table, though on the visual department, I feel like it could use a bit of work. Demolisher was one of the flashier ones, and I love the amount of raw power behind this one. It's a very single-minded playstyle of trying to hit the enemy as hard as possible, but the stacking aspect on Arms Warrior is definitely going to lose at a couple of points, leaving us with a Mountain Thane Warrior, which has the thematics, it has the art style, it even changes the rotation for Fury Warriors, even in a very small way that doesn't necessarily change the core, but it makes you feel like the warrior has upgraded or has transformed in another direction entirely. And the little interactions between abilities and thunderclaps and the way that it all functions, I think does it justice, and probably what I think all the hero specs should more or less look like and feel like. There should be some kind of a distinct gameplay change without necessarily destroying all of the core that's been built up over the last expansions, and I feel like Mountain Thane accomplishes this job super well on every single front. But at the end of the day, I want to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. Which of the hero specs did you enjoy the most, or which one of them did you get excited for the most when it comes to potentially picking up a warrior in the War Within expansion? As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.